Evans. I'm one of the co-founders of CODEPINK. And I too was a part of the boycott, divest, sanction movement for South Africa back in the 80s and 90s, and know the power of this tool from then. And it's, we engaged as CODEPINK as soon as we could. In 2009, our first campaign as CODEPINK was leading on a campaign to take on Hava. It was a product that was stealing the mud from the Dead Sea and making a beauty product out of it. It was being produced in the occupied territories, and the labeling said made in Israel. So in 2009, we did about 8 trips to Gaza. It took about 1,000 people. And on one of those trips, we decided to expose the stupidity of Israel not letting anything into Gaza. And we, paper, toys, like we were on the other side of the border in Israel showing what wasn't being allowed in. We were clowning with Patch Adams at the border for a week, trying to expose the stupidity of what Israel was doing and continues to do. This was before it was a genocide. It was just apartheid. Trying to raise it up so we wouldn't have to come to this moment. But while we were there, we went and explored and saw Hava, saw where it was. And at the Hava store at the Hilton in Tel Aviv in June of 2009, we launched our Hava campaign. And so, one of the things that we need to think about as we do these kind of campaigns, and, why boycott, divest, and sanction is an effective tool, is that, first of all, focus. When our hearts are being broken, we're watching violence by power, we're trying to scratch at it wherever we can. Buckshot isn't quite so effective as focus, as having a campaign that you can use as a teaching tool, as an inspiration tool, as an engagement tool for others to learn and join the movement. So, we'd been taking people to Gaza, trying to raise up the story about what was happening in Gaza, and today's about story. And so, what a great story that the stolen beauty of Palestine is called Hava, and it's owned by and operated by those outside of the West Bank, but calling it Israel. It was a perfect campaign. But it took 5 years until we forced its value down to almost nothing and forced those who owned it to sell it and move it outside of the occupied territories. So the other thing about these campaigns is they take time, they take persistence, they take our engagement, and they take us escalating in thoughtful ways. But it's always about the process. And I say the process starts with our understanding of what we're doing, why, who we are doing it for, and it's happening with this action. So always infusing what you're doing in a campaign with the why. As I always say, as the blessing of this moment, so it has more energy from your awareness for your, mine is always, from the love of the people of Palestine. Breaking down what the BDS movement is, it starts in Palestine. It starts with the leadership of the people in Palestine calling out to us, the global community, to be in support of them. And there are so many things that we can boycott, so many people we can call on to sanction, and so many ways we can call on those who are invested in those perpetrating a genocide and apartheid to divest. Let's just sit in this moment of knowing that this is an effective tool. And, I leaped into this by someone posting in the chat that they were part of the movement for South Africa. So also knowing that something is effective is important in how we ground ourselves in this movement. So South Africa, it was successful, correct? I want to talk about how it also builds culture. And I said that earlier about how you create the tools to educate. How do you create the engagement, the inspiration? But I was in South Africa on October 7th of last year. And I want to say the culture of the movement doesn't die. Those people that went with us to Gaza in 2009 were from around the world. I would say almost all of them had been involved in the BDS movement for South Africa. We become acculturated in our practices, in our behaviors. And so Naledi, was speaking to us on October, I think, 9th in South Africa. Her fierceness, her understanding came from her knowing what it was to live under apartheid, came from her knowing what it means to have a global community engage. And what we have seen from her has been the legal actions that have been effective, not in ending the apartheid or the genocide, but in engaging more people and giving more people the ground to stand on. So also this movement is, how do we give people a ground to stand on, a place to have, we're standing together in a global community. We have this tool, we are using it. And that global community whose shoulders we stand on, that's there to support us also as we move into action and engagement. So that's a bit of an overview of the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign as a whole, and even a little bit as we look at it as we've been engaging with it for the last 14 months. And I would say for us at CODEPINK since 2009. How was our Hava campaign successful? Was a daily commitment to action. I mean, in some way, every day we were scratching at a Hava, whether it was in social media, whether it was at a store where the store had to call them, whether it was writing letters, letter writing campaigns, disrupting their ad campaigns. It takes all of us to figure out, like, what is the way that they continue to have to feel us, because they're making a lot of money, right? We're at the beginning, we're white noise. We're going to make it, that it's like, we're not white noise anymore. We're irritants. And how to get to the place where we're an irritant sometimes are the processes on the way that get us to make a personal commitment, a personal sacrifice, a personal engagement. Because we can't expect these people that are making head over heels money and to listen until, we scratch enough that we've pulled back those curtains and become irritants until they change their behavior. And I want to share a little bit of the story of Hava. We went to the woman who owned, we found out who the investors were, we found out who the owners were. We went, it's like the constant step in, what are the steps deeper and deeper into irritating those that actually have the levers of power, right? The power mapping that we need to do. And she happened to be someone who funded human rights organizations. And we said, we're going to have to out you because you're violating human rights. And we're going to teach you how. So it's not, it's the process of teaching that, someone needs to be able to act from information, not from hate, not from anger, but from information to get to making a decision. And it was kind of the last day. We'd given them a deadline. And I went over to their house, sat at the dinner table, kids were at the dinner table, and went over the education of it one more time. And it was the 17-year-old son that said, Mom, you can't do this. That the next day, she sold the company and gave not only the profits from the company, but every dollar that she had invested in the company to Palestinian human rights organizations. So it takes commitment, it takes the constant acting, and it takes that first act that happens on behalf of us to start the ball rolling. And so that first act was many of you, and I hope all of you, and if not all of you, Grace, who always has our backs and has our backs today. Thank you, Grace. if Grace could post the petition that we've delivered and will continue to deliver to Netflix, because we want to keep delivering it. You know, we delivered it when it was 10,000 signatures. We've delivered it when it was 15,000 signatures. We're going to deliver it now that it's gotten to 20,000 signatures to let them know we're not going away. This will continue, and the signatures will continue. We will continue to grow the pressure. So if you haven't already signed up, which I assume everyone here has, that's the first step. But also take that link, and when this is over, you know, it's email it to your friends, share it on your social media. This is the first step in. The next step is divesting yourself, canceling your subscription to Netflix. Now, you know, let's talk about canceling our subscriptions to Netflix. And I want to talk about this and then bring in our special guest, because the campaign towards Netflix is really, really, really serious on many, many levels, because this is about stories. This is about the erasure of a culture, of a people. And, you know, we think about Netflix as a corporation, but it's much more serious than that. Netflix has taken the commons of storytelling. Let's think of us as humans, right? What do humans first do? They tell stories around the campfire. You know, for millennia, one of the first things about being human is arising the stories around a campfire. So this isn't just a corporation. This is a corporation that has privatized where stories are told. So when they are taking stories off of what has become a commons, even though we have to pay for it, is still commonly held, and we can look at all these places. You know, on one of my other hats is cultivating a local peace economy, where we've been owned by the war economy and we need to take ourselves off. Well, so this is also a way that you recognize how you've been owned by the war economy. And Netflix is, you know, owned by the State Department, drives the violence inside of our heads, drives the stories of violence and imperialism and against the, you know, enemies of the empire. That's what it serves. So when you take yourself off of Netflix, it's the same as taking yourself off of the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's a way to divest your own brain, your own heart, your own soul off of the stories that aren't going to serve your heart of love and peace. But, you know, think about Netflix as the library of stories that they have privatized. You know, just like Nestle's privatizes water, that, you know, it should be every human's right. Stories have been privatized by Netflix. And let me just say, as a documentary filmmaker who Netflix bought, you know, their first documentary from our team, the Square, about the revolution in Egypt, they have not only privatized this space, but they've, you know, also really disrupted what even a documentary is. They have contorted and toxified even what documentary is seen as now, and made it pablum instead of the cutting edge storytelling where we could go to find out truth that it was before they kind of overtook the market. I divest. I'm so sorry. I digress. I mean, so recognizing why this is so important is more than just that it's about Netflix. But this is the same as the burning of books, because it is the denial of these stories to the commons that this has become in people's living rooms. So, you know, knowing why we do things and all the layers of why we do things is important. And one of our partners in this campaign is Artists Against Apartheid. And Tahia has joined us today. She's one of the lead organizers for Artists Against Apartheid. She's an organizer, stylist, writer, and cultural worker who lives in New York City. And she's previously coordinator of political education at the People's Forum. And she's been involved in grassroots organizing ever since she was a teen, from educating justice to building a tenants union of Bengali immigrants. She's been active around Cuba and also, of course, the solidarity with the Palestinians. She's committed to uplifting and teaching the history of working class struggle and building a people's culture, which is also kind of where this Netflix campaign, crosses over. So I'm so happy you could be with us, Tahia. If you could share with us what you're doing, why story is important, and a little more about Artists Against Apartheid.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. Thank you, CodePink, Grace, and everyone who's on the call today. It is so key that we're at a place where we can recognize the stronghold that this corporate media, that these institutions have on us, and the culture and the resistance that we build kind of against that, and what we can build in opposition to that. Um, Netflix has been silencing our stories, but I do want to share a really heartwarming story of recently of where we saw the opposite of our stories getting silenced, but rather uplifted. Last week, Artists Against Apartheid, we collaborated with volunteers of the Shut It Down for Palestine movement here in New York. And we gathered in this old church called Stone Circle Theater. We're chanting Free Palestine. It's like echoing, reverberating throughout the walls of the church. And we screened uh, this 22 short films from Gaza called From Ground Zero. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. If you have, please put it into the chat. It's developed just in this past year since October 7th. 3 to 5 minute films. Literally, these are stories showing the everyday humanity of living in a genocide, of the stories of getting flour, of trying to go to school, of trying to identify bodies in body bags. Um, and it was one of those things that could have settled like the sense of despair in the room, but instead, I wanted to share a quote. There was a filmmaker named Hannah Lewa. She was a teacher who's walking around Gaza, and she asked, as she's walking around, where is the music in Gaza? Where is the music in Rafah? And there's this scene where she's playing guitar and she's singing together with her friends, and they say in the song, translated from Arabic, that I reject despair, ugliness, and war. Tomorrow we will forget the crises and we will see beautiful smiles again. It's certain the happy days will return. Um, and just after we watched these 22 films that could really send folks into this spiral of um, the destruction that we're seeing at the hands of the US empire and the Zionist entity, um, that quote, that moment showed us the importance of film, of documentary, of storytelling, of archiving our histories, of creating new culture, of proliferating it around the world. That we weren't in this church just as voyeurs. We weren't there just to watch it and then go home and to have this like intellectual, artistic exercise, but that we watch this as political participants, and that we are building a mass movement for Palestine now, over 400 days later, with truly millions of people activated in unprecedented anti-war movement continuing to build, and that we're just at the beginning, and that the Palestinian resistance and the people of Gaza show us the way. And so, we're in this room and we implored every single person to find a way to get involved. And this is one of those ways, is joining the BDS movement. And so in this last year, I wanted to share in the next few minutes, what is Artists Against Apartheid? Why did we form in this last year? What has some of that work looked like? And the legacy that we're coming from, that's also coming from the footsteps of South Africa's Artists United Against Apartheid. Um, so Artists Against Apartheid, we are a mass network of organizers, artists, cultural workers, and we formed immediately following the resistance of October 7th. And we started with this public statement and this letter calling on all artists and cultural workers to commit to using our platforms and our cultural practices at every turn to combat misinformation, um, from both the US empire and the Zionist entity, and to stand firmly in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle for sovereignty, self-determination. And now to date, I'm happy to say that we have over 15,000 artists from all over the globe who have signed on, from mainstream musicians that you might have heard of, right? Like Macklemore and Kehlani, Broadway actors who have started to put their foot down, to local artist collectives, people for like in a very broad sense of what it means to be an artist and culture worker. Because while, you don't have to be a working artist. We're all purveyors of culture. We're all receiving culture every single day, and it's really on us to build what it is we want to see. And that's where arts and culture is so important. And so we're a growing movement. I wanted to share, this is a newspaper that we released after October 7th last year. Um, we put out a call for visual arts. Um, and you might have seen a lot of these pieces of art all over, at Actions and things like that. People have been printing them out, making their own pieces. We have some quotes from Ghassan Kanafani in here, and we have our statement. Which you can also see at againstapartheid.art, the full statement, and you can also sign on as well if you're an artist. But yeah, so we follow in the footsteps of those who came before us fighting apartheid in South Africa, as we are now using our tools to fight Israeli apartheid in Palestine. And so in 1985, a network of US-based musicians formed Artists United Against Apartheid, and artists, and they called to protest the apartheid regime. They organized artists, they came together, they expressed their international solidarity. Um, Artists United Against Apartheid collaborated with nearly 50 recording artists, including U2, Run DMC, Bob Dylan, etc., to create resistance music. And they drew connections between the plight of Native Americans and Black South Africans. They led cultural boycotts. They challenged record labels, clubs, and venues who were silent. Um, and they put forward an internationalist vision for freedom. And most importantly, they boycotted playing in South Africa, which had ripple effects and inspired other artists to do the same. And now we know that they ended up on the right side of history. And so some of the things that we talk about with our artists, because, there's a lot of tangible work that we've done in the last year. And I'll get into some of that. We have built these huge puppets and visual arts and actions. We've, disrupted nightlife spaces. We have disrupted Kamala Harris's jazz fundraiser, knowing that jazz is historically a Black and working class resistance music. And the fact that our music was used to uplift a genocidal campaign, was a shame, and so disrupted that event. But what we talk about is that as artists, we must see ourselves as fighters, because we know the power of culture to transform hearts and minds, and that we're not just consuming or making art on the sidelines or to line our pockets or to distract us, which is a lot of how art is talked about in the United States and how it's co-opted, that it's to distract us, it's this individualist expression. But that we have a historic role in liberation movements, from that in Vietnam, in Cuba, in Palestine. We have a historic role in forming and maintaining public opinion, um, and that we have to be the ones to tell the stories, to archive our revolutionary histories, and that what we create, from poetry to film, it moves people. For myself, I have worked with clothes. I used to sell and work with secondhand and vintage clothing. And I say that working with clothes and styling and putting together a piece was honestly one of the first ways that I really learned about um, the global supply chain and the exploitation of garment workers and labor, and the history of textiles, and the long histories of resistance embedded into the threads. And we see it now where people are donning keffiyehs and expressing their solidarity in this way. They've had museum workers in Artists Against Apartheid who've been fired from the Noguchi Museum for simply wearing a keffiyeh to work. Um, and we know that culture is a weapon. It's a weapon that the ruling class, that the US knows how to wield very conveniently for their motives. how the ruling class uses culture to put forward a certain capitalist ideology of transaction, of consumption, of manufacturing consent for genocide to pillage other lands and the lands of other people. The corporate media, CNN, NBC, New York Times, the Zionist cultural institutions, Netflix, they're manufacturing consent for this genocide every day. And so, as artists, it's our duty to intervene, to battle the genocidal propaganda, to use our cultural work to challenge systems of oppression, and to make the fight for our inevitable liberation irresistible, and to make it absolutely impossible to cross the line. And so conversations that we have with this large network of artists against apartheid is that is think about leveraging power in the institutions and the social environments, then the spaces that we are inhabiting day in and day out, where we experience and we exert cultural influences. Because the US empire not only has, as Jody were talking about, the largest war economy and the most expansive and expensive military apparatus in the world, but it also controls the largest and most sophisticated system of cultural imperialism and psychological warfare in human history. Um, in this last year, we've seen boards of cultural institutions who have fired workers who stand with Palestine, universities. So in places of holding like intellectual creation, have fired workers who stand with Palestine, have censored students and professors. Record labels and musicians have dropped musicians and actors who dare post a statement of support. And despite US imperialism's desperate attempt to maintain the pro-Israel narrative, the people's movements in Palestine and around the world and us have pierced the veil. And so Artists Against Apartheid and all of us here, we're part of a very clear and profound demonstration of cultural resistance. When you see the artist next to you put out a statement, put out a song, put out a piece of clothing, a poem, a film that's standing with Palestine, that's standing against oppression, that's actually making a statement, it inspires you to do the same. It tells you that you can do that as well, and we're going to do it. Because, you know, here in the US, the artistic institutions are owned by the ruling class, by the bourgeoisie, and they determine the kind of art that we make under capitalism. And they've somehow told us that the alternative is to be a starving artist, and they glorify that picture, right? Um, but that's a deliberate tool. To be a culture worker in the US, creating art that is anti-hegemonic and that has a political message is to be forever marked as this kind of artist and often skipped over for opportunities. Um, we've seen examples like in Cuba. There is a union for artists. So if you are someone who is going to dedicate their life to creating art and perfecting and working on your craft, like you will be supported through that project. Um, we've also seen here in the US that art of a revolutionary message is co-opted and bought by the same institutions that fund oppression. And so when you see that Black Lives Matter sign completely like defanged of its revolutionary message and put up on a museum wall that fires workers who speak about racial injustice, there's a cognitive dissonance there that they try to really instill into us, right? Or they make slogans that they print in mass on the backs of exploited labor. Um, yeah, the US state did everything that they could to suppress revolutionary ideas in the 50s and the 60s. They filled the board of MoMA with CIA operatives and state representatives. They sent jazz musicians around the world to quell any of like burgeoning revolutionary movements. I just saw a really beautiful film called The Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which it is a archival story, all documentary footage from the UN and from the non-aligned movement, that is tracking quite specifically how the CIA and the State Department used jazz to both distract the people of the Congo in their burgeoning movement and in the plot to assassinate Patrice Lumumba. So highly recommend if anyone wants to see that film. And so as artists right now, we see ourselves as organizers, we see ourselves as folks who are building a people's culture, and that this moment is about Palestine, since we know that the liberation of Palestine is a liberation for us all. But it's also a lifelong battle of ensuring that our cultural work is dedicated to a world free from capitalism and imperialism. And so the next time that October 7th breaks out, we want to be able to mobilize quickly as cultural workers. We want to be able to organize each other to act and to inject that spirit of liberation. And, we come from this history of workers and artist organizers like Emery Douglas of the Black Panthers, the Medu Arts Ensemble of South Africa. We study their strategies and tactics. We uplift, for example, I talked about earlier, UNIAC, the Union for Artists and Cultural Workers in Cuba. We follow the lead of Palestinian artists of history like Ghassan Kanafani, who used his pen as a sword, um, of Naji al-Ali, the infamous Handala symbol of Malak Matar, who's a young artist, 25 years old right now, from Gaza, making this incredible work and now traveling the world with this exhibition. Um, and the Palestinian resistance in particular understood the power of arts and cultures because they're not just trying to preserve their cultural identity in the face of colonization, but they are trying to combat Zionism and inject a spirit of resistance. Because the Zionists knew how to cement that ethno-fascist ideology into every facet of cultural production, from theater to language. And so artists in Palestine, they had street theater in Jenin, murals everywhere, photos of martyrs. And in conversations with Palestinian solidarity organizers here, that what we think about as our role as artists and cultural workers for the liberation of Palestine is one, we are here to create resources to build solidarity with organizations, parties, national liberation movements, countries around the world. We're here to provide current information and analysis of the Palestinian liberation struggle, um, ensure a long-term sustainability of the movement, combat apathy, combat demoralization, um, to communicate the political compass of the Palestinian liberation struggle, of martyrs, of resistance, of refugees, of political prisoners. Someone that had said to me that martyrdom without political visual language is simply death. And so we need to add that language and inject that in there and add the story, the humanity to it. And we see that in Palestine. The PLO had a robust arts and cultural production. Um, and, artists and culture workers, we are responsible for creating a new humanity, a new vision for what we want to see, a culture from which life and revolution grow. And so in this last year, um, so exciting to see how artists have come together. Um, Hundreds, thousands of us across the nation, you've seen like the really big puppets of Netanyahu and Biden and Kamala at actions. Um, we have worked on, um, we have worked with organizing different sectors of the arts and cultural scene. So the DJs have created a DJs Against Apartheid, where they have dropped out of working with clubs and venues that are directly sympathetic and in connection with the IOF. We've gone on to radio shows and shared resistance music from around the world, which is really important. Radio is a key and historical way in which information was disseminated throughout historical struggles. We've worked with textile artists who do Tatrice at an action that we had in New York last year. Last week, we saw a theater group dress up as La Lloronas, so crying from the history of Mexican folklore, crying women carrying babies. And they were with us throughout the whole action, dressed up and doing a theatrical work in the midst of the action. Um, Artists inject story, artists inject humanity, artists tell the true the lifeblood of our movement. And so this is why we're organizing Artists Against Apartheid. That's what the last year has looked like. This is the legacy that we come from. And so we're so excited that this specific movement of BDS against Netflix and boycotting Netflix is here and happening. It's really important. And I also encourage all of us to be creating and telling our own stories, and to be political participants in that. We're not just artists on the sidelines, but we are artists who are fighters. Um, and that's all I got. And that's what I wanted to share about Artists Against Apartheid. So thank you all. And thank you for listening.
Tahia, thank you so much. And thanks for what you're doing and for really bringing us into the core heart of this campaign. You know, we talked about BDS, but this campaign is potent because exactly what you said, stories are what make us human. And so when someone, you know, takes over the commons and then denies the stories of the people of Palestine, that is the burning the books, that is the erasure of a people. And so it's the added spice of why this campaign against Netflix is so important. So we've been posting how the artists that are listening can join you. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. We've been part of Artists Against Apartheid since you started. And also because CODEPINK, we always use culture in our campaigns. We know you can't go against anything. We're trying to be disarming using art, using props and costumes and theater and song and dance as part of our work for peace. So yes, thank you for raising that up. You're an amazing storyteller. What an inspiration to have you with us today. Thank you so much. So let's go back to the Netflix campaign. And yes, so you've signed up. You've canceled your subscription, the act of your own act of, you know, okay, I'm going to deny myself something. And then you're kind of more deeply engaged. That has its own energy when you go to ask your friends to say off of Netflix. But what we wanted to do today was really let you know that it's more, you know, that Netflix is more than just taking away the Palestinian stories. Netflix is a poster child for what is wrong. And, you know, how they drive this culture of imperialism, of colonialism, of hate, of violence, of racism. And so here's, you know, the opportunity in this campaign to be, as Tahia said, to be the story, to raise the stories. So I feel like the next piece of this campaign is what can you do locally? Grace earlier linked you to some of the movies that we've put up online where you can you can go find the stories from Palestine yourself, but more importantly, where you can share them. So that page will continue to grow. It's like, how do you get together for a movie night or a story night where you read together? How do you have a book club? You know, how do you read poetry to each other? How do you bring the culture in not just the act of resistance, which it is to sign, which it is to go, you know, deliver the signatures with us, which it is to take yourself off of Netflix, but then to be building the culture. So part of this BDS campaign on the Netflix campaign is bringing that task of storytelling to yourself. It's like, it's not just being against something, but it is taking over the space that they have occupied and owning it ourselves. Being those that will share the story, will spread the stories, will, you know, be the inspiration in our community that raises these stories up. So, I put it to you, what are some of the places, so should we just cancel our Netflix subscription, and how do I tell and why? Well, so Grace is going to put the link in the chat of, we have the instructions of what you could do. You can do this multiple ways. You can do it online, take a photo, send it to us, and we will share it in our social media. We'll do shares a couple of days a week so that we keep, you know, linking them into their social media, posting them where there's commercials. So we'll keep the social media going. You can do that too. You can post it on your social media. You can post it on a place where you see a Netflix ad, or one of the places is where the show Mary, you know, where you can comment on the show Mary, where they've again erased the Palestinian mom, and instead it's an Israeli woman playing this Palestinian mother, Mary. You could post in there that I canceled my subscription because you are robbing this culture, this, you're denying us the culture of the Palestinian people, even in the act of hiring an Israeli to play Palestinian Mary. So, I think Grace has put it in there. There's that's online, and I think she's got the Boycott Netflix link, so you can go there and there's all the instructions. So you can go online, cancel your subscription, take the photo of the cancel and send it to us, and we will post it. You can share it on your own social media. You can also pick up the phone and call them and say, I am doing this because, can you please tell your supervisor? And they can do it online, or you can do it by phone. Both are effective tools at communicating. Pick your form. The tools are there on the link that Grace has just posted, the Boycott Netflix link. There's a call script also that you can use. So that is your next step, is to cancel your subscription. And if you want to take the video of you talking, you can send it to us. If you want to take the screenshot, we will keep posting this every week as we continue, because we want to get to 100,000 signatures. And like I said earlier, it's the constant scratch. We are not going away. We are going to continue to grow. We are going to continue to teach. We are going to continue to educate people and inspire them to get engaged with this. Oh, there's an example of my cancel that Grace put in. So these campaigns are effective because we don't let go. We don't go away, but we're not going away. We will continue to scratch, but always at CODEPINK, it's like, while you're scratching at power, we also cultivate peace. And the cultivating of peace is the sharing of stories. So once you're done canceling your Netflix subscription, and then asking your friends to sign the petition and cancel their subscription and send your photos, the next is saying to your community and your friends, how do we get together and watch the Palestinian stories that we're being denied, right? And across the world, whenever denial is happening, usually that one is when the story gets read the most. Look at these book burning with the books that are being denied the people in Florida and Texas. Those books are more ordered now than any other time in history. We want to use the moment of oppression to increase the education and increase the connection of community. So the other reason you do this, the other reason you get together and tell stories and share stories, is that right now, more than in many decades, at least in my lifetime, it's so important to be building trusted local communities. It is how all people across the globe meet oppression and authoritarianism. So those local communities are super important. And this is one way you can start to be developing and encouraging and nurturing your own. And that is with stories. So we go back to what Tahia was saying. Stories are what make us human. And we're being denied that human connection by Netflix. We're turning our backs on the war economy, on the warmonger, and we are creating the space to share beauty, to share peace, to share life, and to share what makes us human. And so, it's a many layered act, this campaign. It's why I think it's so important. And we will continue to share with you stories that you can be sharing and everybody that's here is going to get a follow-up email from Grace that will have all of these links. So if you're missing them and you can't find them right now, don't worry. You will get a toolkit in your inbox tomorrow from Grace that gives you all of this, gives you how to sign up for Artists Against Apartheid and get your artist friends to join in also, that gets you all the tools you need to be engaged in the campaign. So I'm going to turn to Grace to help us with questions. Okay, so we heard, one of the favorite things to do, we were asking what's your favorite boycott campaign? And someone said Starbucks, which is also mine, because it's the one thing that's everywhere and you just can watch it gets emptier and emptier and emptier or disappear as they have in my neighborhood. So, this is one campaign. There are so many that we have at CODEPINK, where you can go to our Palestine page and find all the ones that we're engaged in. We're focusing on Netflix today, but certainly we've got Trader Joe's, which is one you can do in your community, and it's another one you can do every day. You can go to management every day and say, why are you still carrying these products from Israel? Why are you still carrying these products for Israel? It doesn't have to look like how all my disruptions look. It can be very relational. It can be very generous. It's just like you want them to have to call headquarters every day to say they're still bugging me. We have the Settler Sanction Group. We have Elbit. Also maybe Grace, you could add the No Thanks app. So, I'm mentioning some of the ones that CODEPINK has taken leadership on, but there are so many. And also, I just want to mention the success this week that the Bay Area Divest had. Shout out to Bay Area Divest. They were successful in getting $32 million divested from Caterpillar from Alameda County funds. That took months and months and months of pressure. They didn't let up. And they had a big success this week. So it's also really important to share the successes. We're, all doing things locally that, are part of this, and things globally. We have an amazing crew in New York City that goes to different embassies and consuls and offices, getting different countries to be, sanctioning and pulling, their support away from Israel. It happens at all levels. The engagement. So, find where you can be engaged. And it could be, the feel good, when your heart is being torn apart, as our hearts are being torn apart every day, there's something that happens inside of you that re-empowers that place where they want to make you feel powerless. When you walk, past the Starbucks and you go to the local place to get your coffee, or where you walk into the, Trader Joe's and speak to the manager and say, this isn't right, that you are selling the products of a country that is inflicting a genocide against another people. Do you not understand that? It takes so long for people to hear, and you can't give up when they don't hear the first time or the 10th time or the 20th time. They will hear. And that's what we need to remember, is it tips, but it doesn't tip if we don't keep pressure, and build movement. So a reminder that all campaigns are both about the target, but they are also maybe 80% about the building of the movement, a building of the education, the building of power locally and with our friends and with our community, because we all constantly learn in the engagement. We also build our own fierce, resistance with engagement. So I'm just want to stop and check and see if there are any questions, or where can I fill in. The No Thanks app is on there. Is there anything I've missed? Tahia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think, yeah, I mean, it feels so great to be fully boycotting Starbucks and some of these big companies. I think it really does tie to the artist's role in this moment as well, because we get to create the alternatives. And so I'm thinking about there just had a People's Market for Palestine at the People's Forum in New York City, hosted with the Palestinian Youth Movement and a bunch of other organizations, um, where we had over 20 artists and vendors selling what is your alternative to Black Friday consumer shopping from the big box market stores. So that's where you can get your gifts for family, and that's where you can get your soaps and your honeys and your art pieces and crafts. And it's just so much more special and of the heart, but also that whole market over one day, I believe, raised over correct me if I'm wrong, I'll have to check, but I think 25,000 towards the international fundraiser for the Middle Eastern Children's Alliance. And that's the power of creating our own. We get to create an alternative, and I really think that that's key and important.
Thank you so much. Yes, Grace, I see your hands up. Can we hear from you?
Yeah, I have a couple questions that I'm culminating from the chat, but a lot of folks are asking about a variety of grocery stores, products, places to shop, asking if they're on the BDS list, asking if we're boycotting them. Do either of you want to speak to the importance of targeted boycotts and really taking leadership from the BDS movement, from people like Jodie and Tahia and Artists Against Apartheid who have been there for a while, when they have these call to actions instead of maybe being sporadic, wanting to run around and boycott everything? What's the importance of using those targeted boycotts?
Thanks, Grace. I think I started out there. Buckshot is not very effective. Target is effective. And being in community, having a target, getting together, all being on it, adds a weight and a force and a focus that is super, super necessary. Yes, it's just about being alive inside of a war economy that is the empire that is violent every day, all day. What we're focusing right now on Palestine, we're focusing. So it's like you just keep refining the focus, which is what we try to help you do at CODEPINK. That's why we have campaigns. That's why we give you tools. That's why it's because doing it together creates a condition that's greater than the sum of the parts. And so that's why it's like if you're move to go do something like out here, pull it back and put it on the thing. Okay, what can I do right here? What can I do with the team? What can I do with the community? Because what we're building is a collective force of love and commitment for justice, for humanity. And it takes being in a collective, otherwise it becomes buckshot and it just kind of goes away. So, I think it's super important that when we pick a campaign, it's like, let's focus. And it doesn't mean, like Tahia said, I'm like, it's like, if I'm shopping at Trader Joe's, I'm making sure I say something. If I'm walking by a Starbucks, as somebody said, how do you let Starbucks know? You let Starbucks know in every way you can do it. I walk in and say, I am not shopping here, and I give them my whole spiel. And if you go to CODEPINK/Palestine, we have a whole teach-in series of things you can engage with that are BDS that gives you tools to engage. So your whole day doesn't need to be about Netflix. We're just here to talk about this campaign has vital importance and is not only like, how do we take on Netflix, but how do we also share the stories of the people of Palestine as the antidote, as the pivot from the war economy to the peace economy? Because the pivoting is also important. It's not just scratching, but how do we build? And that's what a campaign does. It scratches at power and irritates power until it has to change. But it also has to build the peace, the beauty, the humanity, the connective tissue that is being violated by the war economy every day. So that's why we as with everything, it's like using the tool to make us smarter, to make us more effective, and to build, the bricks that get us to the tip over. And so yes, focus is super important. And it doesn't mean that, if your community decides to do something together locally where you see, like I live in LA, we have a Palestinian, store that was brutally attacked and, where everybody could then show up to the store. Well, that's a community. You've taken on that task and you've come together to do that. We have, Tahia is talking about the pop-up store in New York. We have pop-up stores in LA. That's what I'm saying. What can you do locally that spreads the culture of the people of Palestine, whether it's a movie, a play, the poetry, the pop-up store. I'm going to put in, I don't know if everybody knows Leila Hegazi. I know she's a part of Artists Against Apartheid, but she launched her album last week on Bandcamp. I don't know when Bandcamp Friday happens again, but you can buy the album on Bandcamp and the money goes to the Middle East children. So Mecca. So, that's an artist using their art to both inspire you, like every song is super inspirational. And it's this week, the song that we're using on CODEPINK Radio to kind of raise her up. But it's like that. It's like, where are the pieces, the threads that we're building? How do we make them stronger and then weave them together? And so staying where the community is, building with community, always super important. Grace, was there another question?
I think you kind of covered it when people were asking what can they do besides call, besides email. And I think a lot of folks in the chat maybe have that kind of maybe social anxiety that you don't have, Jodie, going into the shops and talking about it. But maybe when you flip to the Trader Joe's, what else have we been using? What resources? We've had maybe some songs you can talk about, and maybe Tahia can talk about like forms of song and dance and stuff to do this. Like, what other versions have we been using to exemplify this boycott in everyday life, not just online?
Well, I want to say also, if you have a Netflix, you could look at what their most recent, I say Mary, start with Mary. Everywhere you see a review of Mary, if you're sitting at home and you have time, take an hour, Google where's the reviews of Mary and see if you can add a review of Mary and talk about why this is wrong and talk about, cultural co-optation, talk about, cultural denial, like use it as an educational moment of the, and that Netflix is really burning the books because they are the commons of the story space. And they've not only occupied it for their own greed and for money, but now they're denying Palestinian stories. And what do they think about that? Just and put it in as a question. Put it, like you've got these spaces where Netflix has a place where you can be public. Say the reason I'm giving, Mary a 0 is because of, who they decided to put in the role of Mary. That, here was an opportunity in the middle of a genocide to hire at least a Palestinian actress to play the Palestinian mother. So use the opportunities to educate. Netflix is out there. You've got all these links you can take people to. If you remember, you don't know who you're speaking to. I always like, if I'm get up in the room, it's like, maybe I'm speaking to 2 people, but those 2 people matter because they turn into, and I, when we, Rania Kalik and Ta-Nehisi Coates are a good example, right? So I use that example of like, never silence your voice. If you know a truth and you can share it and you have the time, find a space where that voice does not exist and infiltrate it. Just like CODEPINK did today, disrupting Blinken, which everybody got arrested. It was beautiful. If you want to be inspired, check out CODEPINK disrupting Blinken today. But, we know from history that violence happens when people are silent. So when, again, back to that moment when you feel disempowered, where you feel powerless, where you're just watching insanity and you just can't believe it's happening, and it's like, okay, what could I do right here in this moment? Well, you could just look, pick up the Google and start going, okay, what can I do to disrupt with my voice right now that's about Netflix? Because it's out there, it's kind of public. And use that opportunity to get on it and to teach and to say why this matters, why stories matter. We heard from Tahia, it's like, stories make us human. Why would they deny this story? And you have that opportunity to infiltrate. And so it's this opportunity to use your voice. You have no idea who's listening. Like Ta-Nehisi Coates, he thinks he's doing really good, and he's speaking very proudly about his book and gets disrupted by Rania Kalik that says you're wrong about history. And what happens is, like 9-10 years later, a very potent voice at a time we need it around Palestine. So plant seeds. Your voice, speaking truth, is a seed into the violence that we live inside of. Please always, we've got all the tools for you. Ground yourself in the story, share it, and share it beautifully. Share it out of curiosity, share it out of love. I always, whenever I go into Congress or where I'm disrupting or when I'm into Traders, like, I first, before I even walk in the door, say, why am I here? I'm here for the love of the people of Palestine. I'm here to humanize another human so that you don't dehumanize the person that you're talking to. Because to humanize the Palestinian, I have to humanize the man who's managing the Trader Joe's store, because to dehumanize anyone is to dehumanize everyone. And it's what we see in what's happening, is to dehumanize a Palestinian, is to dehumanize yourself. And we see that in the Israelis, and we see that in our neighbors who can't be human in this moment. And that, you know, that comes from dehumanizing another. First, it dehumanizes us. So there's many layers to engage with this. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, interrupting Blanket was fantastic today. And remembering that it's things like, it's, you know, Blinken's an idiot. He's talk about dehumanize. The man is a robot. Is he, you know, do we think we're disrupting him because he's going to listen to us? No, we call that scratching. We scratch at power and make them uncomfortable and make it very irritating for them when we are there. But what did that do for you, for me, for the people in Palestine, for the people across the world? It's like, yes, no, they weren't silent in the moment. It's like, let that teach you what you can do in your way, where you are in a room to share. So any other questions? I've gone a little over our time. And I promise you, I know we've like gone through a lot. You've learned a lot today, and there's a lot of tools. Grace, our amazing Grace, who keeps us all together and makes the everything land well and supportively. We'll give you an email in the morning that will have like all these links, all the next steps. And then, you know, we have our local communities to engage with. If you haven't started your local CODEPINK community, here's a great way to start one around Palestinian storytelling. And we're here to help you. We're always here to help you. That is what our job is at CODEPINK. We are here to help activists across the country to be engaged for peace and justice. And so our task always is like, how do we help you? So always feel free to reach out. I think we've finished. I don't see any more questions. Tahia, last words.
Oh, yes. I just agree with everything that you said. And it's also such a key tenet of Artists Against Apartheid in this moment. There, there's a lot of questions about, what does it mean for us to also be in mainstream institutions or cultural spaces? But actually, what's really key is to cede no space, meaning, and it's what you were talking about, that cede no space. Someone had put into the chat about music and nightlife venues. And imagine getting onto the mic at a nightlife session, party. And this is a natural space to organize people because there's actually thousands of people packed in a club. And then you get onto the mic, and now you're talking about Palestine and capitalism and imperialism and about how to get involved. But what's really key is also knowing who your audience is. Are you in a place where you're trying to agitate people towards a moment of deeper political participation? Are you at a place of like-minded folks where you want to build something together and build something specific? Or are you at the door of Blinken? Or are we interrupting the Jazz for Kamala fundraiser? We're actually, Layla, we outside set up a busking situation, and Layla was doing renditions of like classic jazz songs and like other like Taylor Swift and Adele and things like that, with the lyrics about no jazz for genocide, none of our art being used to co-opt this movement of working class struggle. But like that's a moment in which actually we're agitating in a way that like we are trying to shut things down in a lot of ways. And then you don't know who you're going to touch. You don't know the person 4 years down the line who's going to say something and who will remember this moment, or the video that will go viral that will inspire so many other people. And so that's also key as artists. Cede no space and don't be afraid. Don't let yourself be silenced. Make the story, do the thing. Thank you, Jodie, and thank you everybody also.
Great way to end. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for being such amazing Peacemakers, love you. We'll see you next time. Thanks for all you do, and make sure to reach out with questions. We're here for you. Thanks, Tahia. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, all of you.